everyone who is here at this meet and greet for Eliz Markowitz, HD 28, and Preston Kulkarni, who's running for Congressional District 22. We are SAVE, Save Texas, South Asian American Voter Engagement, Education and Empowerment. It was founded by this amazing woman, Chamba Farbu, who is also here. We've been around for about almost 4 years now, working in the space to educate and leverage the South Asian voice and vote. Hitan Patel he's also part of SAVE. He is in Williamson County. We are all over the state. I'm in the Houston area. Chanda's in the Dallas or North Texas area. And our goal tonight is to give everyone an opportunity to not just know who these candidates are, but to kind of understand, what their policy perspectives are, and to recognize that, in the election, we're not just going to go in and vote, for the president and then walk away. It's about showing up and voting down. What happens at the local level is so important, just as what happens at the federal level. The two go hand in hand, and yet the two, operate completely differently. So our goal is to kind of talk about both of those in tandem, and give you an opportunity to, get to know your candidates in your area in a way that maybe you haven't had an opportunity to thus far. We know that as South Asians, we are among the largest growing population in the country. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Hitan, who is going to kind of break down some of those stats for us.
Yeah, thanks, Swati. As she mentioned, my name is Hitan Patel. I'm one of the regional directors for the Central Texas region. Chanda, can I take back the host so that I can show the slides, or just nod or yes or no? No, okay. We'll come back to slides later. But when we sat down and looked at the 2020 election cycle, we really wanted to identify the areas that we as a South Asian community can make an impact. And so we basically looked at three factors. One was which races for congressional office, U.S. Congress, could we impact? Which races for the Texas House could we impact? And then which districts do we actually have enough South Asian voters where effort on our part would actually potentially make a difference?
And I'm sorry, you're the host. You can have the slides back. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. And when I say make a difference, I mean specifically either we would be the margin of victory, or we could get us really close to the margin of victory. So Dr. Markowitz and Shri Kulkarni, both of their races fit into that bucket, and they're both tier 1 races for us. So we obviously will be spending a lot of our effort reaching out to voters, getting them to register, getting them to vote, helping with voter ID, etc. But what does that mean specifically? So for CD22, we have over almost 45,000 South Asian registered voters in Shri's district. We, in the 2018 cycle, had 59% turnout, which was very close to the state average, which actually for us as a community is very good. We tend to vote at rates lower than the state average. And honestly, it's a little bit of the nicest house in an ugliest neighborhood type analogy, because Texas is not a voting state. So while I'm happy that we're close to the average, I certainly by no means take pride in the fact that we're close to the average. In terms of what's happened since then, have people voted in 2019 and so far through the 2020 election cycle, the primary cycle? We don't. And again, this is fairly close to the state average. 68% of us basically have checked out since 2018. In Shree's area and in Dr. Markowitz's area, 67%. So I just bring this up because it gets to the heart of what we as an organization are trying to achieve. We're trying to educate, engage, and empower South Asian voters. I also share that with the candidates on the call here because the street is a two-way street, right? Historically, we have not showed up to vote because we haven't been engaged in the process. And opportunities like this for us as a community to meet candidates, for us to hear directly from them and vice versa, for them to hear directly from us, is the beginning point to increasing these numbers. So on my behalf and on the organization's behalf, I thank both of you for spending an hour with us this evening. And obviously the 30 odd people that we have on the call, thank you for taking time out to hear from these great candidates. That's it for me. I will turn it back over to Swati to begin our conversation.
Thank you, Hiten. So like Hiten was saying, I mean, we as voters, we can't just own that statistic of being the largest, largest segment of the population, growing segment of the population, voting population. We have to show up at the polls, and we have to show up enlightened and educated, knowing who we want to represent us. I thought that we would start with the conversation with both Dr. Markowitz and with Shree. And I'm going to give them an opportunity to kind of give us a 5-minute elevator pitch on, who they are, what they represent, and why they should be elected. And I would ask that if any of you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Hiten and Chanda are also going to kind of be monitoring the chat, and so if we have some questions, we can ask our candidate. Okay, so ladies first, we will ask Dr. Markowitz. 5 minutes. Introduce yourself. Give us a brief overview of your platform, and I'd love for you to incorporate how the diverse nature of your district has influenced your views and your policies. Go ahead, the floor is yours. Or the room is yours.
Thank you so much, Swati, and thank you guys for having this forum, for the opportunity for myself and Shree to speak to everyone. As Swati said, my name is Eliz Markowitz. I'm currently running to be your next state representative for Texas House District 28. I was born and raised in Sugar Land, Texas. My mother was a teacher. My dad worked in the oil industry. And when I was about 9 years old, we moved to England and then to Holland for about 8 years. Moved back to Katy, which is where I graduated from high school and then went off to college. Got my undergraduate degree in computer science, and then went on to work for the Princeton Review, where I still work today, helping kids conquer the evils of standardized testing and achieving their academic goals. And I also went on to pursue my master's in management. And I was working on that degree when in 2009, my mother unexpectedly and suddenly passed away. As an only child, I wanted to move back to be with my dad, who's my best friend and my biggest cheerleader. And so I moved back to Katy, and then decided to enroll in a health informatics master's program. My mother had many medical conditions and had fallen through the cracks of the healthcare system. And so with her passing, I felt this need to ensure that that didn't happen to anyone else and to try to do something that was more important than working for a large global corporation and benefiting myself, but giving back to others. And I was able to work with the Department of Health and Human Services to develop electronic medical reconciliation applications, which lowered the mortality rates of individuals from adverse drug interactions. And it was a really great feeling because I was able to do something that was literally saving lives or helping to save lives with other people. But I was also still teaching, and I was also watching my fellow classmates in the master's program just drop around me, just from a basic failure of being able to learn the material and a lack of quality teaching skills. And so I decided to pursue my doctorate in education, finished that up in 2017, and realized that there was nobody running for the Texas State Board of Education at that point for District 7. And it seemed that it was my duty and my obligation to give back to the society that helped raise me. So I ran for the Texas State Board of Education in a highly red, highly gerrymandered district. We knew it was gonna be an uphill road. The likelihood of winning was almost nil, but we were able to move the needle from 33% to 41% during the 2018 midterms. And when I was going around, it was not only education that was a priority, but it was the lack of healthcare. It was the improper criminal justice regulations and the lack of environmental justice reforms that were taking place. It was the fact that people didn't know if they could see their children at the end of the day because of gun violence. And all of these things culminated to me wanting to serve HD 28, which is my home. And I thought it was absolutely necessary to have someone who understood the diverse backgrounds of Fort Bend County, the most diverse county in the country, rather than having the same old individual represent the people of this growingly diverse district and represent special interests in the top 1%. And so we were thrust into a special election in 2019, and we were able to have the highest turnout in special election history in Texas. And we built up some great momentum along with the help of many people who are here and Shri himself, who was out knocking doors for us. And we've just been nonstop since then, trying to make sure that come November 3rd, we not just flip HD 28, but we also get Shri to Congress. And so we can have a partnership in Fort Bend County to serve all the diverse communities here.
Thank you, Dr. Markowitz. And there was so much about your story that I just didn't know. I love how you've channeled all of your experiences into where you are today and how you want, others to be able to, have some of the opportunities and not have to deal with some of the challenges that you had to, moving forward. So thank you for putting yourself into this race and making this commitment to wanting to improve lives in your district.
Thanks for standing with me, y'all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we'll get to know you more. I'm gonna let Shri have an opportunity to introduce himself and to talk a little bit about what it means. I guess being a South Asian, you probably have a little bit of a different perspective of what it means to be a South Asian and to be running and representing the interests of everybody around you. So take the room, Shri.
First, I'll take mute off. and then second, I will take the opportunity to say thank you to everybody on here who has been part of this campaign, because there's so many people here who have been part of this for the last 3 years. This isn't just a campaign that started this year. We really started December of 2017 and have not stopped since then. So I want to appreciate everybody who's been with us since the beginning and the people who've joined us along the way. For those of you who don't know me, most of the things that we have been fighting for in this campaign are born of my personal experiences growing up here as a kid. The son of an immigrant, started out in a 2-bedroom apartment with 9 people in it. And I think it's important to understand that immigrant experience, not only for being treated differently, because that does happen again and again, but the kind of demonization of immigrants that's happening right now across the country. And it's gotten worse over the last several years, especially from people in positions of power. And I would say to anybody who thinks that immigration is a threat to the United States, they don't know the history of the United States, because it is those waves of immigrants from every country in the world, the people who came here to create their American dream, that make America different. We don't have the largest population in the world. We don't have the largest landmass in the world, but we have the most diverse country in the world. And that's something to be proud of. And that's what drives our innovation the spirit of entrepreneurship and creativity that we have in the United States, and allows us to solve some of the world's greatest problems. On top of that, the kind of things I experienced growing up, busing across town to get a better public education. We know that there's still not equity in education across our communities from zip code to zip code. And that's something that I think Dr. Markowitz in particular is concerned about. Experiencing the effects of climate change, which we do again and again here in Houston. When we have 3 500-year floods in a 4-year period, that doesn't mean we're safe for 1,500 years. What it means is that the climate is changing. It's not a Chinese hoax, as some officials have said, but it is real. We believe in science, and we know the effects here. I've had to sleep on the floor of a stranger's house while we've lost our car. My brother and sister almost lost their life as floodwaters are rising around Houston. I've also had to see the devastating effects of gun violence in our society. I've been there with my father and my brother, with my mom and little sister and little brother in the car, and people open fire right in front of us. We all had to hit the ground not knowing if my mom would make it out alive or dead. I've come home and seen yellow tape around my neighbor's house because they were murdered in their own homes. And then unfortunately, this continues on today. I had to attend the funeral of a girl in 2018 who was murdered in that massacre in Santa Fe, and knowing that we need to protect our public spaces for our children and our families, that's extremely personal to me. But the most personal thing probably is healthcare. And that's because when I was 18 years old, my dad got acute myelocytic leukemia. I had to drop out of University of Texas and come home and take care of him, do his IVs and his physical therapy, take him back and forth to MD Anderson. And when he unfortunately passed away after battling with a bone marrow transplant, my family was left on the point of bankruptcy. I had to work my way through school, help raise my younger siblings, and that is still the #1 cause of bankruptcy in this country today. And it's unconscionable that they're suing right now to take away healthcare from millions of more people at this time. After graduating from University of Texas, I eventually joined the Foreign Service, and I served overseas in places like Iraq and Russia, Israel, Taiwan, Jamaica, and I did countering Russian disinformation back in DC. I was supposed to be serving overseas right now in India. The reason I'm back here at this moment is because of the tremendous challenge we face internally here in the United States. And what I mean by that is the attacks on people from our own communities, whether it's attacking Barack Obama's birth certificate, which is now being revived against Kamala Harris as we speak, whether it's attacks on the Hispanic community saying that migrants are drug dealers and rapists, or that a Hispanic judge can't be fair, the attack on the Muslim community, calling to ban all people simply because of their faith. The final straw for me was the Charlottesville Nazi rally, where an actual honest-to-God Nazi rally happened and a woman was killed. And a woman from Bel Air High School, the first person in her family to go to college, was put into the hospital. And I was waiting overseas for what my government was going to say. And people were asking me about it. And the answer came that there were very fine people on both sides of this issue. And I was asked, is this controversial in the United States? Are Nazis very fine people? Is this something that we should have to worry about if we go to the United States? And I said, no, this is not controversial in the United States. This is not what we stand for. And this government honestly does not represent me or any of us. And that's when I decided to resign from the Foreign Service, come home and fight for the values that unite us as a society. And when we started, this district had been considered one of the safest Republican districts in the country. It was Tom DeLay's old district. He was the majority leader here. He had gerrymandered it that way. Pete Olson had won this district by 35%. But having said that, this district also had some unique characteristics. We are more than 50% college educated. We're about 60% people of color. We should actually be leaning Democrat. Why is it that we were safe Republican? Because 1 out of every 4 people here is an immigrant. And we were told, don't bother with immigrants because they don't vote. And the easiest way to lose an election is to talk to people who don't vote. But we said the easiest way to never get change is to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So we tried to recruit people from every single one of the major immigrant communities. I'm proud to say that as of now, we are campaigning in 27 languages, the most of any campaign in US history. And we're gonna try to continue to increase that. And as a result of that work and having the largest relational organizing program in the country, which we can talk about later if you want, we were able to get within 4.9 points without even being on the national radar. We weren't even in the top 91 races, according to the Democratic Party in the country. We got within 4.9 points of beating a 5-term sitting incumbent Republican, Pete Olson. And then after that, we've registered 50,000 new voters on top of that in our district. And Pete Olson dropped out of the race, and now it's an open seat. And to be honest, Eliz's race does not have an incumbent, really, because both of the two incumbents in House District 26 and 28 also stepped down. It's the only place in the country where a Republican congressman and 2 Republican state representatives have all stepped down in the same district in the same year. So we have a tremendous opportunity here. And I will say, in terms of the South Asian community, in particular, one of the challenges is that we are so diverse. When people talk about the Asian community, there's not one Asian community, there are many Asian communities. And so the challenge of making lists of Gujarati voters and Telugu voters and Tamil and Kannada and all faiths as well, whether we're talking about a Hindu, Sikh, Parsi, Jain, Sunni Muslim, Ismaili Muslim, Bori Muslim, there is a lot of work that goes into organizing diverse communities. But I can tell you that the benefits are tremendous, because once we start to incorporate everybody, we try to pull in all of these different communities, it completely changes the character of our district. It changes the character of our representation as well, because it means that everybody has a stake in this election. And we know that the challenges have only gotten greater in the last couple of years since we started this, because this year is the most important election of our lifetimes. That is not exaggeration. We know that we have almost 200,000 people dead across this country. 650,000 people have lost their health care in Texas just this year alone. We have millions of children who don't know if they're going to get a proper education this year, and 1 out of every 6 small businesses have failed. The challenges are the greatest we've ever seen in our lifetimes, but I am optimistic. I'm optimistic about the future. I'm optimistic about 2020 as a turning point, because we've also seen a change in social consciousness this year, like nothing in our lifetimes, like nothing since the 1960s. In a dramatic way and in a very, very rapid fashion, we have seen people change on issues of racial equality, for example. So 60,000 people out in the streets of Houston, 200 people in the streets of Vidor, the capital of the KKK in Texas, protesting for Black lives. And so those are the 2 things I think that we need to emphasize to people. Is one, we need to believe in a shared reality. We need to believe in science to address scientific problems. We can't be conspiracy theorists, because that affects everything, our health, our education, our economy. But we also have to make sure that every community has a voice. Everyone has a seat at the table in our society. And if we believe in those 2 things, I think that we as Americans, and especially right here in Fort Bend in Texas 22, we can set an example for the rest of the country and the world of how these diverse communities come together to solve our biggest challenges together.
Thank you, Shri. That was quite an elevator pitch, I have to say. But you know what? You and Dr. Markowitz touched on, quite a few talking points that you don't always hear from the other side. And so that kind of brings me, it brings me to the question I want to ask, ask the both of you to kind of answer. You both talked about, education, equity, inclusivity. With Republicans, we often hear that they vote with their wallets, or we often hear that Republicans vote with their wallets. What does that mean to you, and what would be your counterstatement? What is or would be your counterstatement?
You want to go ahead, Dr. Markowitz?
So I would say that when we're saying that Republicans vote with their wallets, that they're really putting their own fiscal stability as a priority above all else. And I think that it's a very self-serving thing, whereas I would say, I would hope that individuals supporting Democratic candidates like myself and Shri are voting because of the moral and ethical compass that we both hold and our desire to actually bring about positive change to society. I think for far too long, we've had individuals run for office and be elected simply because they're the standard bearer of the party and someone who has the clout of the party members. And I think it's really important that we actually have politicians who are selected by the people and not by parties themselves.
So I would say one thing just off the bat, when people ask the question, are you a Republican or a Democrat? Are you centrist or progressive? What I've found is what they're asking is, what tribe are you in? I want to know if I should hate you or love you because you're in or out of my tribe. And I say to people, well, are you an American? Are you actually a human being? Because If you are, then you're in my tribe, and just tell me what your concerns are. And so when I hear that, about voting with your wallet, I hear the concern. People care first and foremost about their family, about their livelihood. And so I ask them, so what are the policies that actually make that difference in your family's livelihood? First of all, who is looking out for average people, for working people, and not necessarily the top 1% or 10th of 1%, because that's what we've seen happen over the last few years, is income inequality has gotten even worse, and especially during the pandemic. We've seen some of the wealthiest people in our country triple their net worth while people are getting evicted from their homes across this country. But on top of that, when we talk about the difference between a tax cut, for example, versus investing that money in education or health, we have to talk about it in those terms. What I said was an investment. So in the short term, it may make sense to do a tax cut for the wealthiest and give huge breaks to corporations, which then use them for stock buybacks and dividends. But that doesn't actually help build our country. And a great example is the public education system. 150 years ago, we did not have a public education system. More than half of Americans did not even go to 1 year of school. We invested in an education system. And now we should probably be investing in a higher education system, because that is what is required in the 21st century to be competitive for our economy. We should be investing in the health of our citizens. We should be investing in a clean environment. And the reason I call it an investment is because if you had a company where the workforce was uneducated, they lived in a poor environment, or they were unhealthy, you would have a terrible company. You wouldn't have a strong workforce. And that's what we're talking about. We can frame all of our policy points in terms of fiscal priorities, because that's the point for me. It's not about separating us into Republicans and Democrats. It's about creating a platform that actually allows more people to come into our vision, because it's a vision for everyone.
And I'd like to just piggyback off that, because you emphasize the need for high quality education. And I think that it's important to note that all of our quality of life outcomes are linked to having a high quality public education system. With an educated society, our health outcomes improve. We have a lower incidence of crime and any sort of disruption within our neighborhood. And overall, our quality of life is just far more improved when we have an educated society. So I think moving forward, we need to reverse the damage that has been done during this administration and ensure that we are providing equitable.
Are you all done?
Real quick, if people have their microphones on, can you please just mute them? We also have a question on the chat, Swati, if it's okay if I interject. Just on the topic that just passed, though, I've always kind of been entertained by the question, because I would also almost challenge the premise, which is these are binary options, right? I've always thought that you can do well by doing good, right? So, and that's true for me as an individual, but that's also, I think, true of us as a society, that if we have a more equitable, just society, that we will actually all do well financially, economically. So anyway, with that said, the question that is in the chat is about voting safety and election safety, basically this election cycle. We've obviously heard a lot of news about the Postal Service and slowdowns. The president is challenging the validity of mail-in ballots, etc. Have you worked with any election commissions or watchdog groups or anything like that? What advice can you give to us about the upcoming election and election security integrity?
So maybe I'll go first this time, and then we can switch around. So I will say that I think the concerns about election integrity are serious, and they're valid. I am extremely worried about the attacks on the integrity of our elections. Last year in Texas, over 100,000 people, they were targeted to be taken off the voting roll simply because they weren't citizens 20 years ago. My cousin wasn't a citizen 20 years ago. There's no rule or law that if you weren't a citizen 20 years ago, you cannot vote today. And then the attacks that are coming this year, they come in many forms, but specifically on mail-in voting. I think it's very clear that there's no evidence that this is a fraudulent system, and that everyone should have the right, as they do in other states, to vote by mail, especially in a crisis like we're in right now. But the other party, unfortunately, has taken this to the highest levels of our government, all the way to the Supreme Court, to prevent that ability. And on top of that, now our very postal system is being attacked just to prevent people from voting. So these attacks on the integrity of our elections. They're real. The Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell refuses to do anything about protecting our elections from interference from outside groups, including Russia, which I know I did countering Russian disinformation in the State Department. It's real. These reports have come out. It's not a hoax, and they continue to do this. Having said that, I will say that the enthusiasm that I've seen for this election is greater than any in my lifetime. And I mean that sincerely. I see enthusiasm from young people. I see enthusiasm from immigrants, people who used to be apolitical, for example, in the scientific and the medical community, who realize that there's something different about this election when doctors and nurses are being attacked by protesters. I had a physician who told me that the first time in his life, he diagnosed a patient with a disease, and the patient said, "You're just trying to pad your numbers because you don't like the president." That's a dangerous place to be in. And so I think that enthusiasm level is there. I think we need to educate people, and we're in our campaign, we're doing it in 27 languages on the procedures for voting. So people who are coming out to vote for the first time or rare voters know their rights. They know that as we mentioned in the chat here, you can take your mail-in ballot, seal it, and actually drop it off at an election center to make sure that it gets delivered. And if you are going in person, I don't have the right to vote by mail. I'm not over 65, but I can sit in my car as long as I want, and you have the right to curbside voting in Texas. But people don't realize that. So it's on us to make sure we educate people. But I will say, seeing those 60,000 people in the streets of Houston, 200 people invited, seeing that energy level, that gives me so much optimism, because we should have had the lowest turnout election ever in July, because it was an off-cycle election in a runoff during a pandemic when Democrats are more worried. What happened? We had the highest turnout ever. We broke the record for Democratic turnout in Texas this year in July. And I've talked to people who have said to me, I will stay home for 3 months straight, but I will come out for one day to make sure and vote in this election. And we need to keep reiterating that again. This is the most important election of your lifetime. Don't let anybody stop you from voting.
And I think we can also add to that in Fort Bend County, we've had instances of individuals being turned away from the polls. And so I know that both Shree's campaign and my campaign are making sure that we staff the polls with yellow shirts, quote unquote, who are poll workers who are willing to help look up voters and make sure that they do have the opportunity to vote. We also had a massive win yesterday in the state of Texas when Judge Garcia decided to overturn the law which would throw away ballots if there was a signature mismatch, now ensuring that there is a due and proper method of verifying those signatures, which should be a huge boon for all Texans because it's ensuring more fair and equitable elections. And it should also be noted that if you did request an absentee ballot, but then you decide to vote in person, that is absolutely okay. Just take your absentee ballot with you to the polls. They will call it in, cancel your absentee ballot, and you will be able to vote right then and there. So you should not have any reason not to be able to cast your ballot. And I know in Fort Bend County, we've been sending out ballots to all of our over 65 population. So everyone in Fort Bend should be in good shape.
And I see there's a question in the chat about curbside voting. Just to clarify what I was saying, if you drive up, you can wave down a volunteer or staff member, and they will bring out the ballot to you so you can vote in the safety of your car. You do not, if you're worried about coronavirus, they're trying to make it as safe as possible. Use Q-tips to touch the screen, for example, as much social distancing as possible, but you can do it from your car. And I will say in Wisconsin, they tried to do the same thing. They went all the way to the Supreme Court to keep people from voting. People stayed in their cars in Milwaukee in long lines. And guess what happened? They flipped the Supreme Court seat. That means that 200,000 more people are going to be able to vote in November. So that's what we need to make sure people do. No matter what it takes, show up to vote.
I was going to add, because I've seen a little bit in the chat that there's a lot of questions about voting. And Hithan, and I think Nathan might be on as well. We actually had done an entire show on voting in Texas during COVID. And we have an FAQ, which I don't know, maybe somebody can put in the chat. It's just got a bunch of questions.
I'm putting it in right now.
Okay, great. And if this is something that, people later on want addressed and have questions about, we can talk to you guys about maybe doing like a whole show, or not show, but like a whole seminar on voting. Curbside voting has been around. I actually did it during the runoffs. It's very easy. I live in Harris County. but it's like Shri was saying, and Dr. Markowitz, it's across the state. So it's very, very easy to do. Everything is brought to you. They give you like these little finger condoms, and you know, you're just, I mean, it's simple. It's very simple. You know, I had another question I was going to ask, but Dr. Markowitz and Shri, you brought up something that made me kind of wonder. We are living during a time of a lot of disinformation, and there's a lot of fear stoking, you know, from the other side. So what happens if everything is flipped? You know, we flip the Texas ledge, we flip DC. We have, you know, Biden and Harris are, you know, our president and vice president. How do we get people to start trusting in the government again? Because even like with the CDC right now and the FDA, all the changes that have come, you know, week after week, month after month, do this, don't do this. There will be a vaccine, there won't be a vaccine. We think there'll be a vaccine. So what would you all do to earn back that trust so that we can have like a basic level of, you know, of expectations that our government is really working for us in our interests?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because I don't think I've ever seen such hatred and vitriol amongst different groups in this country, amongst our neighbors, than I have in the past 4 years. I've said before that every day that we progress in this society is traveling down into this dystopian society that I wouldn't even believe were realistic if I were to read it in a novel. Things have gotten so out of hand. But one of the things that our campaign has run on is being honest, having integrity, diversity, and inclusion in everything that we do. And I've also stated multiple times that one of the first things that I would do if elected to office would be to build a bipartisan coalition. It wasn't too long ago that Democrats and Republicans were able to work together to answer the most pressing issues of the day without villainizing one another and pigeonholing them into these extreme corners that is currently occurring. And if we continue down this path, we're simply not going to be able to progress as a society, and we will see the fall of this country. And so I would encourage everyone to approach whatever they do this election with a frame of how is it going to be for my children? How is our future going to look if we don't make a change and we don't install individuals who have a moral and ethical compass to all levels of office, whether it be the local state house, whether it be county-wide offices, statewide, or at the federal level? Because quite frankly, what we've seen is a dissolution of fact and truth, a dissolution of moral character. And that's quite frankly not the America that I think any of us want to be a part of. So personally, I would like us to return to the values of common decency and compassion, and just doing unto others as we wish to be done to ourselves. And hopefully that message will resonate with enough of the population and will be able to temper and address the current hatred and vitriol that has captured the society.
So I think there's two parts to that question. One is the part that Dr. Markowitz was talking about, and I do believe that we have to come together across these political divisions. We have to trust in each other. When we were so divided in 2016, and you know, I had friends of mine who were attacking each other on social media, I decided to reach out to a Republican colleague, and we started a group called Breaking Bread, where we would sit down for a meal once a week and try to put ourselves in the other person's shoes, not to debate the other person, but try to understand their perspective. And so one person would bring up a concern that they have, and another person would not respond, but would restate their concern in different words. And almost inevitably, you find out that the second person had a caricature of the first person's perspective. And then you go back to the first person and ask them to explain how they really feel. And after 2 or 3 rounds of this, then usually we get to a point where the first person would say, yes, now you got where I'm coming from. And then you're able to open it up to the rest of the group to try and address the first person's concerns without violating the second person's values. You don't always get an answer, but at least you get a difference of perspective. perspective. And I think that's the attitude that I want to take to representation here. So I say I'll be willing to sit down with anybody, Republican, Democrat, or independent, among all of my constituents, because I've got to represent them and I've got to understand their concerns. I don't have to always agree with their solutions, but I have to take their concerns seriously and try to address them the best way I can. Our country wasn't founded by people who agreed on everything. It was founded by people who disagreed very strongly, but they agreed on one thing, that we were stronger as a nation than we were as 13 separate colonies. And I care about your interest, you care about mine. That's what makes us a nation. And I guess the second part, though, of that question is the trust in government itself. And I think that part is what we're getting at with our community organizing principle, because to me, this is not about just winning an election on November 3rd. If we win an election and there's still that much anger, so much vitriol, then it's just a Pyrrhic victory. And so all of these different communities, especially immigrant communities, but across all of our different groups, whether they're neighborhood communities, whether they're church communities, whether linguistic or ethnic communities, each one of them should feel connected, that they are organized. This isn't about just making phone calls or texting once. This is about the structure that we have organized ourselves that we can raise our concerns up to the highest levels of power in the country and the world, the US federal government. And so that when I'm there representing our community in Washington, DC, they don't feel disconnected. They don't feel like I've left, there's lobbyists coming in and out of my door, special interest groups. And I think we have to have publicly financed campaigns, by the way. That's got to be a core of what we do, because that will change everything in Washington, DC. So that when I'm advocating for them, I'm advocating for the people, the communities of my district, and then I can communicate that back to the people through those community networks. That's how you feel connected to your government, because the problem is people see government as something separate from them, and they shouldn't, because in a democracy, the government is them.
Sorry, I was on mute. No, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think it's you know, it's almost like, you know, being in a really bad relationship, and you have a really bad, you know, and you break up because you know it's going nowhere, and then, you know, finding someone again, and then, you know, trying to find that ability to trust. But, you know, like you said, you know, if there's compassion, there's empathy, there's transparency and inclusivity, you know, you can learn to love again. But anyway, I digress. So, you know, as we're talking about this, and I hear both of you talking about levels of government, I think it might be important to talk about how your roles are differentiated, you know, at the state level and then at the congressional level, and what you're able to do for your constituents, you know, where a congressional candidate could come in and be able to help, you know, somebody versus a state representative. Or so either one of you, if you could just kind of briefly answer that, just so that we all know.
Sure. So on the federal level, we have a lot of responsibilities. I would say probably the biggest one is the power of the purse, which resides in Congress, specifically in the Constitution. That means the kind of funding priorities. I mean, that's how we determine what our priorities are as a society. What are the things that we're going to invest in? For example, here's a great bipartisan example. Infrastructure. We know that we need investments in infrastructure, for example, to prevent further damage from flooding that we experience year after year, or just the kind of transportation infrastructure we have in this country, the kind of internet infrastructure we have in this country. When we see how our infrastructure compares to other countries, when Iran has a better high-speed rail than the United States of America, I think that's something that we should be embarrassed about, because we have the people, we have the skills, we have the technology. We just haven't made those kind of investments because we're not willing to cooperate in a bipartisan way to do this. But both sides want to do this. We know that we need these kind of investments. And the other thing that Congress can do specifically is they can hold the executive accountable, because there's so many things that reside within the executive. For example, the EPA. If we have issues with a landfill that's producing noxious gases in Pearland, for example, and the EPA is not doing their job because under this administration, they have been gutted. and they are not putting the environment of our families and our communities as their top priority, then we can hold them accountable. We bring them in and we actually have hearings. We put pressure on the executive to do its job properly. And then of course, there's a basic function of the legislative, which is to make laws that apply to the entire country. But in a lot of cases, there's an interaction between the state level and the local level, because there are different sets of laws that will apply to the entire country versus the state level. And I think that Eliz and I will work very closely together, as we will both work with our local government too. And we just had a town hall yesterday about that, about the importance of local government and working together all along the way, so that we understand how the government actually helps us at every single level.
Please, Dr.
So,
Markowitz,
yeah.
want to add anything to that?
So I'm going to answer the question and also try to answer the questions that were in the chat room at the same time.
Yeah, because I think there's one about
there's
STAR
a lot,
test.
quite a few about education, so we'll be able to tackle that. So from a federal standpoint, SRI would be in charge of reforming ESSA, which is the Elementary School Secondary Act, which would allow us to eliminate standardized testing as a metric for funding. At the state level, however, I have said publicly, and I will reaffirm it again, that the first piece of legislation that I would file would be to eliminate the STAR test, because quite frankly, standardized testing is an unreliable and invalid metric of student achievement and aptitude. When I was working on my doctorate, my entire thesis and dissertation was on how standardized tests don't properly evaluate student or teacher or educational institution aptitude. And so quite frankly, it's a waste of money, which is also one of the things that we could do in order to ensure that we were better funding our public education system. So we spend billions of dollars on the development, creation, assessment, evaluation, printing the scores out, administration, lost classroom time, on using standardized testing. And if we were to redirect that money that is being wasted, quite frankly, we would have more money to ensure that we were having high quality, equitable education across the board. Furthermore, in 2011, the Texas House cut $5.4 billion from the education budget, which is why since 2011, you may have noticed that your property taxes have increased steadily. And that's because the state of Texas prior to that was paying roughly 50% of public education, as is stated should be done in the Texas Constitution. Unfortunately, when that $5.4 billion was taken out, the burden was put on the taxpayers, and now the state only pays 38%. It was 36% prior to the last legislative session, but when we passed HB 3, there was a temporary stopgap measure that's akin to putting a Band-Aid on a leaking pipe to allow a 2% gap for the next 2 years. But all of this stuff has to be faced again when the legislature resumes in January. And quite frankly, we've just been cutting the budget for education. We spend about $9,000 per student in the state of Texas, whereas we spend about $22,000 per prisoner in the state of Texas, which is mind-boggling at best. If we were to actually utilize the money that we have in our public reservoirs and redirect it to things like ensuring that we have a high quality education, so we have a booming economy, so we have high quality healthcare outcomes, we wouldn't be facing the current situation that we are today.
Can I add one thing, Swati? One thing specifically that the federal government, I think, should do is address issues of discrimination, especially when there are disparities between states. And a couple examples would be if the LGBT community or if women's rights are disparate between different states, then we have an obligation to try and address that at the federal level. And I would even extend that, you know, when certain states did not expand Medicaid, for example. In our district in particular, we have a 27% Latino population, and that disproportionately affected that community. And so those are the kind of things that I think the federal government can also remedy when states are not doing their job to ensure that everybody has equal access to these things like healthcare.
Yeah, you know, as you talk about it, and Dr. Markowitz, it just makes me think about all of these questions around Robin Hood and, the public school infrastructure is just completely broken. And, you know, and I'm looking at the time as well. I mean, I have all these questions I would love to ask you. So we may have to like do a part 2 one day, because, you know, I would love to know as well, even though you're not in my district, these are conversations that we all need to be having, because it affects all of us, right? At the state level. You know, one of the things I wanted.
Robin Hood is broken, and the public school funding formulas need to be completely revamped and rewritten.
Absolutely.
Just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think people really quite understand how public school funding works, you know? I'm in Harris County, part of HISD. I mean, you know, it's another conversation, but we definitely should have it, you know, in the near future. But I want to ask a question. I know there's a lot of questions in the chat, but I did want to ask a question. I had 2 questions.
We've only got a few minutes left, so.
Yeah, okay. Let me ask you this question about healthcare. Texas has the highest rate and largest number of uninsured people in the US, almost 5 million, and over 11% of those are children. These high rates limit our ability to improve dozens of urgent health problems, including maternal mortality rates, lack of access to substance use and opioid treatment services. Sorry. I'm sorry. Did you all hear somebody?
I muted him. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. A lack of access to substance use and opioid treatment services and mental health services, which are now overwhelmingly provided by jails and hospitals. How will you ensure that none of your constituents are left behind in the coverage gap created by Texas's refusal to expand Medicaid, which we talked about earlier? And Shri, what fixes should Congress prioritize to improve the U.S. healthcare system? So Eliz, Dr. Markowitz, if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. So first and foremost, we need to take the $10 billion in Medicaid expansion off the table that has been there for years. And unfortunately, the Republican legislature has simply decided to disperse these funds. These funds have already come out of our taxpayer dollars. So there's absolutely no reason for us not to utilize them to cover more uninsured individuals. I also think that we need to have a progressive public option, which is phased in over a short period of time so that we can cover all individuals without leaving anybody behind. This public option could be a Medicare for all type deal that's in addition to a private option as well, available for people who currently have union healthcare that's covered by their employers and or private healthcare covered through their employers. But we need to stop the cycle of expecting healthcare to be linked to employment solely. Healthcare is a human right, and everybody should be able to access affordable healthcare, whether that's preventative, emergent, vision, mental, pharmaceutical, orthopedic, any type of healthcare we need.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, echo everything that Dr. Markowitz said. As I said earlier, I think we definitely, I honestly don't think it should be up to the states. I think we should have expanded Medicaid across the country, point blank, you know, because there's no reason that you should not have the same access in Texas as in another state. And it's unconscionable. It's literally playing political games with people's lives. So that's one part of it. Another part of it is reducing the cost. I mean, that's the biggest problem that I hear from people, especially the cost of prescription drugs. You know, there's 5 people in line at CVS, and each one of them could be paying a completely different price for that exact same drug. And so we need to be able to negotiate prescription drug prices and bring them down. But we also need to think about what are the components of health, you know, so women's reproductive health, which you mentioned already. So I mean, this is something that is an issue of, I think, disparate treatment and disparate outcomes for people. We know that maternal mortality, especially for low-income women of color, is 3 times as high as it is for other people, and that's unconscionable in the United States of America. We have the technology. We are a wealthy country. We should not be treating human beings like that. And we know that taking that reproductive healthcare access away from people, it's not going to achieve the goals that people want. In fact, I was actually just looking at some data the other day. The number of abortions, we've gone down by about 50% in abortions over the last 30 years. And that has come almost entirely under Democratic administrations,
Absolutely.
The way to do that and to also improve women's health is to increase access to education, increase access to reproductive health services, not to criminalize things. And then secondly, in terms of mental health, this is a huge issue that personally, it's very important to me. I think that we need to expand access to mental health because right now, so many people don't have access to those kind of services at all. It's not covered under any kind of insurance, and almost every aspect of social problem that we see in society, whether it's drug addiction, whether it's violence. I was just at the Humane Society the other day, and when they rescue animals, a lot of times they're rescuing them not from people who are trying to be cruel to animals, but for people who have mental health issues and they can't even take care of the animals that they take in. Literally every aspect of our society is impacted by mental health. And I think in 2020, we should recognize that our health is not just physical health, it's mental health as well. That's part of the entire health continuum.
I have, a list of questions that I would love to ask you, but Hithen, are there some questions in the chat? Because I'm looking at the time and I want to be mindful of everybody who's here. So are there some questions that we could get to quickly?
Clearly, we need a round two.
Not quickly. I mean, there is one about Social Security and its solvency beyond 2023. If Shri, you can do that in 30 seconds.
Yeah, I can do that in 30 seconds. A payroll tax cut is not a tax cut. A payroll tax cut is gutting Social Security. In fact, probably what we need is the opposite. We need a modest increase in the payroll tax because what it is taking care of the people who worked their entire lives. Like my mother had to raise 4 kids on her own after her husband died, and we should not be taking that away from people when they need it the most.
Okay.
30 seconds.
We do have, yeah, that's great. I just want to put up a couple of slides for folks because we, like you as candidates, we have an incredibly busy schedule. And I just want to share that with our audience. If you do have the opportunity, obviously the candidates have volunteer opportunities, and I've posted their websites a few times in the chat. Please go to their sites and help them out as best you can. If you want to target the South Asian community more specifically, you can go to our website and join our group as well. And then we also have just some of our big events that are coming up. You can go to the Mobilize site and get all of them listed. But the big one that we have is this Saturday. We're trying to reach almost 250,000 South Asian voters with Beto and his group Powered by People. So it'll be a combination of pep rally with Beto. He'll be there, as well as, just getting down and dirty and doing the work. So if you've never text banked, this is honestly one of the easiest entry points, if you will. You don't have the nervousness of speaking to somebody on the phone. It's all, just done anonymously, essentially. You don't use your own personal phone. It's done through the computer. So anyway, sign up. We definitely could use your help. Thank you. We have a statewide judiciary panel coming up next week with Judges Meacham, Sandel, Clinton, and Collier. It's going to be about representation in the judiciary and what it means for justice. We're going to have
I'm going to interrupt real quickly. That's a really interesting panel. Is it Julie Meacham? I think, is that her name? She's running for Texas.
Amy Clark Meacham.
Amy, she's running for Texas Supreme Court. Currently, the entire Supreme Court in Texas is all Republican. And
all male.
And all male, yes. And so that is actually going to be a very interesting conversation. Ravi Sandel, Judge Sandel, he's a judge here in Harris County. He ran 2 years ago, or was it last year?
In the 2018 cycle.
2018, yeah, 2018. He ran, so he's familiar with what it takes. And then Rabia Collier is also, she is a Pakistani judge in Harris County as well. Really, really interesting conversation. I would highly advise you to sign up and be a part of it.
And Judge Clinton is Asian. So, we have
yes,
a broad representation. Well, for South Asian representation, it's not like hugely broad, but, for our community, it represents kind of the full gamut, if you will. We have another event. This is in honor of National Voter Registration Day. We are going to blitz 4 counties, possibly 5 neighborhoods that are South Asian concentrations. We've got another DFW candidate meet and greet on the 29th. And then at the end of this month, early part of next month, we're also going to have a statewide panel headlined by MJ Hager and a bunch of other candidates. So we'll post that one once things are a little more finalized. In closing, national poll worker recruitment. We need poll workers. So if you are open to the idea, please go to powerthepolls.org. They will guide you to your county and the rules and regulations about becoming a poll worker. In Texas, these are paid positions, so it can put a little change in your pocket. We are now officially 3 minutes past our deadline, so I want to just say thank you to Dr. Markowitz and to Shri Preston Kulkarni. Your time, as I mentioned earlier, is much appreciated. And thank you to our great audience. If you do have follow-on questions, please go to their websites and find out how to get those in front of them. So sorry we were not able to get to all of them, but trying our best to stick to a schedule. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Shri. Thank you,
Thank
Dr. Thank you, Shri. Thank you, Dr. Markowitz, and everybody who joined us today. And we look forward to, getting out the vote for you and to seeing you represent Texas, both in the state, or representing your districts, both at the state level and the congressional level.
Thank you,
for
Swati.
having us.
Thank you, Chanda. Thank you, everybody, for helping us save democracy this year.
Let's go crush it, y'all.
Yeah,
Do it.
go blue. All right.